And we are live. Hello and welcome to Developer Insights. I'm David.
And I'm Justin.
Together we are the leads on game development and design here at Codename.
Not only that, but we're also the founders.
And we'll be your host for this episode and every episode.
Unless we're not.
It's been 100% true so far.
So today is our 19th episode.
Well, it's old enough to drink in Canada.
Huh. Can a live stream drink?
I don't think so, but I think we could.
Oh, I don't think that would result in a very good episode at all.
Well, it could be entertaining. And we might hit that Balmer Peak. Is that too obscure? They can Google it. It's fine. Yeah.
We are here to answer your design and development questions about Idle Champions. And if you ask us about other things, or some of our other games, we might be able to answer those too.
I don't think anyone's ever actually taken us up on that.
Well, we can keep on offering.
Anyway, if you don't ask any questions, you may have to suffer through Justin's one-man reenactment of Alien 3.
I haven't actually seen Alien 3, but I did just read the synopsis.
I can't recommend it.
Oh, what, the movie or the synopsis?
Yeah, you take your pick. Yeah.
Okay. I see that we're already starting to get a bunch of questions.
And as always, we pulled some questions from the previous show that we didn't get to, as well as we have a few items on updates on items we've tagged for the dev team. So let's just hop over to those.
Yeah, so I can get started. We've got some of the things we highlighted from last week's stream that we were going to check up on. So the first one, Garwar asked about the overcapped item level adjustment that I claimed was coming with the anniversary, but I was wrong about that. So it has been put onto the development cycle at this point, and we are just trying to find a place to slot that in. So it is going to come sooner than it was going to come before, because it's actually on the schedule.
Take your word for it.
It is.
Okay.
Yeah.
What else do we have here from last week? We have a question here, which we're doing in the reverse this time, from general question here from Hayden Howard asking about an update on getting the Apple App Store to allow downloading the iOS version for M1 Max. Now, that is something that we took a brief look at. We didn't find an immediate, click and it just goes option, but I know Peter is going to look into that further as soon as he's got a little more time. Yeah. Let's see, what else do we have here? Here's one that is for you, Justin. It was from Rajuvi, and they asked, will there be a way for conditional formation buffs, like Baloth stacks, to be saved if the in-game client is quit or restarts? They're saying here they play on iOS and crashing is frequent.
Yeah. I mean, we answered this last week, or we answered all these questions last week, that we would just check into them. I think you're thinking of the leftover questions from last week's show when we're asking them to each other.
All right.
But
carry on.
Yeah. So for this one, I did talk to Peter about this, and we're going to specifically Baloth stacks. At least we'll look at saving them. I think the reason it wasn't done is because, in general, we save any stacks that last until the end of the adventure. Baloth stacks are kind of this weird quasi thing where they can last to the end of the adventure, but they also fall off if the champion that has them on them dies. So it's kind of a mix of the two, which is why it wasn't done that way initially. So we're going to move to anything that can last to the end of the adventure. We will try and save that so it persists through crashes or resets, or not resets, but restarts. And anything that doesn't last until the end of the adventure does not necessarily save through those things. So that should cover most of these things.
Right. I note someone in the comments was asking, or chat comments, if there was a show last week, and there was not a show last week. We're referring to the previous show.
Sorry.
Yeah.
The last show, whenever we say show last week, just assume that we have terrible memories and we're talking about the ones.
When was the last time we did this? Yeah. All right.
It was a few weeks ago.
2 weeks to be precise. Anyway, let's see. We have another follow-up here on the question about Tiamat favor conversion occurring or popping up immediately after defeating, or after it's completed would be when it would pop up. We did actually just have a discussion about that. It seems like it's likely something that's occurring with the if you're on a different party on a Modron automation, the way that system is set up, it's just accepting that it thinks you're on the Tiamat campaign, and it sounds like that's something that they can get fixed fairly easily. I think Peter was looking to get that in early next week because he's a little concerned about a Switch build that's going out or going to be locked tomorrow. So we're looking into that. And I think the last one here, formation variant NPC taking up formation slots. I'm not actually sure if that got looked at, so I'm just going to leave that one for now.
Okay.
All right, moving on to move on to updates from fixes. I personally have been looking at some memory leak issues that have been occurring. I know I chatted with someone on the Discord about some issues they were having and followed that up, and that resulted in me going down a rabbit hole of profiling and finding a few cases that have been causing slow leaks that have been in the game for a couple of months now at least, and so those have been patched and are fixed, at least on the versions that have been released in the last couple of days, so that's good. And of course, those of you who've been following the show know that one of our developers, Mark, has been working on getting Modron and secondary party fixes in for the last probably, what are we on now, 8 weeks. And so we've got a few updates on that. We've got a fix for resetting to the wrong. If you reset recently, I guess there was an issue where you could reset to a black screen. So that's been found and fixed, which he also thinks might be potentially a fix for resetting to the wrong map. We've added a bunch of additional feedback to the offline progress, reasons why your progress stopped. And so you should be getting more verbose and descriptions about where you got to and why the progress stopped. And there's been some updates to the Modron grid. It shows, it says better bonus displays, but those bonus displays actually were just showing like global 1, global 2, global 3. I think they were very non-descriptive, and so there are actually descriptions on those now, as well as I guess there's a fix was pushed in by Alex that shows the correct bonuses when you aren't connected to an output. And I think the last one here is there's been a bunch of changes to the offline gold rate calculation. Mark promises most of these are in the player's favor, so it should be higher, not lower, which was a concern I had of making sure those are accurate. So that should be, and that will be in a build that goes out. I think the Steam build that went out earlier today has that, and then and subsequent builds after that. So lots of small improvements there. Should be making the offline progress, the Modron and the background parties all work significantly smoother. Okay.
Cool. So yeah, look, we grabbed some questions from last week's show that we just think were good questions that we can get through quickly before we start going into this week's questions. So we'll start out with some of those. So I've got one here from Irene UK, who asks, question, our group struggled to manage top DPS this week because individual players were seeing their own DPS increased by the scroll amount, but not other players. This meant that everyone thought they were out damaging everyone else, but each player saw the other totals differently. Is this a known issue?
Yeah, so we took a look at this and we didn't see a difference on each individual's client versus the numbers that the servers thought players had that would be different because of a scroll amount. But one thing that is occurring here that we think is likely the cause of this, and obviously we'll keep our eye on it just to make sure that there isn't anything underlying here, is that the data that gets shared with people is up to 30 minutes out of date. So if you and your friends are both, if you're pushing towards getting the highest, like you're having a competition who's got the highest DPS, your DPS increase is likely not going to show up on their client for about 15 to 30 minutes. And so you're all going to think you're ahead, and then it's going to catch up. And so a way to check into this would be to sort of everyone stop, wait for an hour, and then check. And if they still don't match, then there could be an issue there. But it looks to us like what was happening here is that players were like checking in with each other real time and seeing that the numbers were off. But it's because it doesn't. It's on a slower asynchronous checkup with the server. So those are out of date by, like I say, up to between 15 and 30 minutes out of date. So I think that's what was going on there. But we'll keep an eye out for the reports. And obviously, if it's something that could be confusing, we'll see if we can come up with a solution for that. If it's just a case that it's doing what it's supposed to, but it's confusing, we'll look at that too. Okay, cool. Next question here is from Dan's J4B, and they ask, at the higher difficulties of Trials of Mount Tiamat, with high area counts, doesn't that mean that every player will have to devote a larger amount of time each day to clear the daily requirement? Yeah,
so the ones that have super high requirements, like when you get towards tier 10, that's going to be quite an investment to do. And And that's kind of intentional. Like we don't want the design intention initially wasn't to have sort of the tier 10 Trials Mount TMAT be something you do every week. It was something that you kind of save up for. You save up your potions, you make sure everyone's like really ready for it, and then it's something you do once in a while when you have kind of enough vials and the right group together. And so, yeah, I think some of those higher ones are definitely intended to take you like a little bit of time each day to get through the adventure, especially once the restrictions start to stack up. So it is intentional that those are harder and will take more time, and the lower ones are easier and will take less time because the higher ones are supposed to be quite challenging.
Okay, next question is from 00Wizard00. Is there a damage versus health difference to where things become a standstill? In other words, if I do x e to the 44 and the mob has x e to the 54, can it become a standstill? I've seen a boss at 8,000 times power up.
Yeah, so there are some situations where your healing and your shielding and your health and whatnot is just so high that it takes a very big power up from the boss in order to be able to get through you. But that's one of the reasons the bosses power up over time, is so that they will eventually just splat your tank and then crush through the rest of your formation, so that these standstills don't last very long. Sometimes there's a bug that exists that causes the boss to kind of stop attacking, and that's sometimes what causes those big power-ups. But in general, once the bosses are supposed to get to the point where they smack through your formation, and if you're not able to kill the monsters fast enough in boss areas, you get knocked back. It is also a power-up that can occur once 100 monsters are spawned on the screen. So that's a similar type of thing. If you get to the point where you're not killing monsters and they're just spawning without any getting killed, then they will eventually start to power up and also beat you back a level or two. So there are some systems in place to try and handle this, and sometimes there's some bugs that break them, and sometimes there's just really good formations that take a long time to break even with the power-ups. So that could be something that we look at maybe adjusting in the future, is to make bosses power up a little bit faster once it's become clear that you're not going to make a dent in them. But we always want to give people a chance, so we don't want to do those power-ups too quickly. We want to give people a chance, so it's like, it gets up to 10 times, it's about to smack you down, and you hit the right ultimates and whatnot and are able to defeat the boss at the last second. So there's a balance between those two things, and we'll continue to try and zero in on that balance. Let's see, here's another question from hi ho ha ha, who says, will you be able to do something in the near future about performance issues? At high levels, there are huge slowdowns / freezes caused by some heroes, or Kira and Baloth are two that they call out here.
Right. So this is a bit of a mixed bag for sure, because we have definitely seen reports about particular heroes, and certain abilities that they have can definitely cause some really high CPU cost recalculations and cause them at a frequent rate. But this is compounded often by having like speed champions and speed potions and other things that also increase the rate at which the game is running, because that then of course increases the rate at which these abilities then re-trigger and recalculate. And so certainly we see, especially if they're offenders, like you called out there, Kira and Baloth, and I'm not personally familiar with sort of exactly the details in there that are causing those to be particularly problematic, but I know that these have come up a number of times, and we can certainly take a look at the individual champions and see if we can make improvements to them. But my guess is that they're likely going to be fairly incremental. This is something that we have dug into on numerous occasions, and we will continue to do so. But it can definitely be tricky, especially when you combine it with the speed potion and speed type stuff, because that does just cause these to happen well, it causes the recalculations to happen over and over and over again very rapidly, and it's sort of, we're stuck in this case of where we want to make sure that all the numbers are accurate at the same time as being able to make sure that everything is running at a higher or running at a performance that's suitable. And unfortunately, we're sort of, that kind of is a bit of a rock and a hard place sometimes when it's like, well, we could just not do these calculations for a few frames and get that performance back, but then the accuracy on it drops. And unfortunately, the system is enormously complex, so the interaction of the character abilities. So I mean, it is one of those things where it'd be nice to, and we continue to work on the performance issues, and when we have certain outliers like those particular champions, that we'll get someone looking at those, and hopefully we can get some improvements, but my guess is that they will be incremental, unfortunately. We just have to get Design Side to stop putting in such complex formation abilities, huh, Justin?
Oh, yeah, those designers, whew, they're the worst.
One note on that, though, that's worth mentioning is we have actually added a new developer to our team that's on the Champions team, and he started this week, and he's already working on bugs, and so that's going to actually open up some additional resources to work on this type of stuff. So
he's working on getting more bugs in there.
Actually, he fixed a long-standing bug that some people in the chat might be familiar with, and that is that we've had reported forever on iOS devices and some Android devices when you go into the settings that you can't move the sliders properly. And whenever we tested that, it worked on our devices, and we sort of scratch our head and wonder, maybe people are just fat fingering it or some. Anyway, as it turns out, on really high resolution devices, there's a bit of an offset, and it drifted more and more depending on the higher resolution device. And it was just because that particular component hadn't taken into account some of the scaling that we do. And so we've got that fixed, and in the next builds that'll be out, and on iOS and Android devices that are high res, you will be able to move those. So it's already going. So
finally, Idle Champions will run better on my 16K screen.
Oh, why would you have that in the size of a phone?
I want the pixels to be smaller than what I can actually physically see.
Yeah. Okay, next question here is from GoPlayer7. And GoPlayer7 asks, for balance updates, would rearranging slots be considered as part of it to make them more balanced?
Yeah, we've talked about this on previous streams, and I kind of put it out there as kind of a fun thing that we could do that would be a big change, is to move some champions around in their bench slots. We haven't decided to do that, but it's definitely something that'll be part of the discussions when we get to seriously considering some major balance changes. So it could be. It's not off the table, let's say that.
Okay.
And the last question here is from Rainier, who asks, can you add icons in the top left of an adventure, i.e. info, store, chest, blessings, patrons, etc., to the campaign map? When deciding what adventure to run for patrons, you either have to go to a separate party to look at the patron challenges, or start a new one to view them and then switch adventures. What are your thoughts on that, Dave?
I mean, so as you and I discussed earlier about this, the reason the various features are not available at the campaign map is because that data isn't loaded if you're only at the campaign map. If you don't have a game running, or some of the data needed for that isn't loaded. But I think we're getting more and more of that. I feel like there was a feature that we did require some more of that data for recently.
Trials. I think in Trials you can access the chess screen or the store or something from the Trials dialogue.
Yeah.
So
I think it's at least worth looking into to make some of that functionality available. It does seem like it's super inconvenient to have to go over to another party to check which challenges. So I think we can look into making that data available on that screen, so those can be available. Yeah, I think that's worth looking at. And as mentioned, we've got some more developer resources on board, so we can move towards getting some of that stuff done.
Yeah. Yeah, in addition to getting new developer resources recently, we also have a new designer resource that I did mention in the last stream that we did, which was 2 weeks ago. But this new designer has now been with us for almost 2 weeks, and you'll start to see some of their contributions in the next month or two.
Yep. Okay. On to the new questions.
Hooray!
We've got one here from Snobbiger. And Snobbiger would like to know, would make sense if there is a known ceiling for Briggs hype stacks. Were his hype-based abilities balanced around that max?
So Briggs hype stacks are kind of funky because they're different from how we do stacks on almost every other champion. They're a little bit more static in that they're just triggered. They're kind of either on or off for the most part, based on sort of how you set up the formation, rather than stacking and going up and down based off actions in the game that are outside your control. So there is a theoretical maximum for them. If you just take the maximum that each individual one can potentially provide. But we didn't balance around that max because it's really hard to finagle your formation to get exactly that, especially when some of his stacks are based off of him having higher DPS or higher damage than other champions or vice versa. So I think I balanced those around, like 30 or 40 stacks being kind of the average. And so if you're above that, you probably have a slightly more powerful Brig. If you're below that, you probably have a slightly less powerful Brig. And so, they weren't balanced around max, and there probably is a theoretical max. It's always better to get more stacks if you can, because one of his abilities increases your damage based off of the highest number of stacks you've ever had. So if you want to spend that time to finagle your formation to really max out his stacks, then that will be rewarding for you, but it's not necessary to make effective use of him. Let's see, there's another question here. Here's a question from Garar.
That's how you pronounce that, I'm positive.
I think that's how it's pronounced, Garar. Who says, will time gates showing year 1 and year 2 champions as being available in the next event be addressed soon? Maybe in a time gate revamp for year 5.
Are we still showing that?
Yeah, that seems like something that we should fix.
Yeah.
I'm moving that to the yellow.
Right.
But
we don't want to get
they're
rid
not
of that
supposed
data.
to be.
We're going to need that data.
Yes, they are supposed to be excluded from time gates while the event is running, and they are supposed to leave the time gates, I think the Sunday before the event starts. So yes, that is a good catch, and something that I think we've talked about on this stream before, and that we will address.
Okay. Next question here is from Cassius335, asking, what do Briggs effect mean by listed attack damage? And what happens to hype stacks when Brig and another champion have the same listed attack damage, regardless of how?
So the attack damage that affects Briggs stuff is the number that appears under the champion's feet when they're in the formation. Or if you're on console, I think that still appears under their feet in the formation.
I think so.
I'm not sure if it does, but yes, it is on the normal PC UI at least. It's the number under their feet, and so that's what's used to determine whether their damage is higher or lower. You can also see it if you mouse over them, or you bring up the little sort of thing that has like their normal attack and their ultimate attack and a couple of tips. It's that attack damage in there. Also, I guess the attack damage listed on their profile, their champion profile dialog. So that's what's used. And I am actually not sure what happens when the attack damage is identical. By the letter of the design, identical would mean it is neither greater than or lower than. So it would probably have no effect, or it would not count towards abilities that are based on whether a champion's damage is lower than or greater than Briggs. So, but I don't know that for sure because I did not actually test that when we were testing that champion, because it's a little bit of a convoluted situation. It's very, very unlikely to occur.
Right. All right. It looks like we're being told that there will be a giveaway starting in about 1 minute. And the keyword on that is Liar's Night, and it will run for 2 minutes. So it's going to start in about a minute. Watch for that and don't miss it.
Yeah, I think that's for 42 chests of your choice.
Let's hope you're not wrong about that.
I think that's what it's for. I'm pretty sure that's normally what it's for.
Okay, cool.
Yes, I'm right.
Next question here is a question from Doorbell Streams. And Doorbell Streams is asking, are there any plans to actively moderate the in-game chat or to replace it with something that you can moderate more easily?
Yeah, good question. So initially, I don't think that we really had any plans to actively moderate, aside from the fact that we can ban people from there if they're being naughty, and we can certainly give people timeouts and stuff. But we don't spend a lot of time sitting in that chat watching what people are chatting about. So I mean, I don't know. What are your thoughts on this, Dave?
Yeah, I mean, certainly the original in-game chat, the focus for where people were chatting changed significantly from the early game to now, because obviously the Discord became a lot more important, and sort of that's the go-to. I mean, if you're looking to chat about the game and you want to make sure that you're not that if there is something that needs to be moderated, it's going to be moderated. That's the place to chat. And it sort of became sort of the in-game chat became less important, sort of less the go-to place with other options that became available. So we don't actually have any plans at the moment to moderate it, and other than every now and then someone pokes their head in and people can get, if they're misbehaving, they can get removed. And we don't at this time have any plans to replace it with something different. Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, it's one of those things that is worth keeping an eye on to make sure things aren't going totally sideways. But the best thing right now is if you are concerned about that, just to chat in the Discord instead. I mean, obviously we don't want to have a toxic chat in the chat main section of the game, but yeah, it's a good question. It probably needs us to keep an eye on it to just make sure that it isn't going sideways. Yeah, I think all of our moderation in our main chat moved elsewhere, and it's sort of been forgotten about largely. Yeah, I think. Yeah, other than when it stops working and someone pings us to kick it and restart the server. So
yes.
Yeah. Okay. Next question here is from Biocron. Biocron would like to know, champions like Ayla and Tyrell have uncapped shields, potentially reaching 1,000% of their health. Others, like Wolfgar and Calliope, have their shields capped at 200%. And Korth and Shaka can only add small shields. Is there a reason for such big differences? And are there plans to balance things up, thus making more viable champions?
Yeah, this is a good question. There are kind of some differences between the champions that you've listed there. So Ayla and Tyrell are both tank champions. Wolfgar is kind of straddles the line a little bit. Calliope is obviously support, and Korth and Shaka are also support. And so I think we try and give Ayla and Tyrell the bigger shields because they are, well, they can use their shields themselves. With that said, I'm not a huge fan of uncapped shields, and it may very well be something that we deal with over time. We might adjust some things there. Garwar is telling me that Wolfgar is a pure tank. Yeah, he may very well be. There are 91 champions in this game. Sometimes I forget. But yes, so I think that's probably something we can look at when we do a big check through on the balance. I'd like to do a balance pass based around sort of the tanking and healing champions, because I think there is some imbalance there that probably needs to be addressed, and it probably won't be a very popular thing to address, but it's probably something that would be beneficial to the life of the game in the long term if there were more viable tanks out there and not just a couple who are a little bit OP. Looking at you, Tyrell, looking at you, Leapy guy. So yeah.
Okay.
It's a good question.
Next question is from Alpha Kroll. Alpha Kroll asks, any update about a set week reset of the trials? Because the later and later it starts, now I have to wait until Friday for the next trial.
Yeah, so that is something that we're still on the plate. It's not something we've forgotten about. And I will highlight this and make sure we get an update for you for next week. because I think just moving the reset down to 6.5 days instead of 7 days, I think would probably address a lot of this issue. Let's see. Here's a question from Famine Dragon, who says, this might have been asked already, but do the familiars have to be bound to specific formations? They all do the same thing, so overlapping the save on multiple parties pretty much breaks the save and makes it useless.
That should no longer be happening. That is something that was fixed. I think Mark got that out 2 weeks ago. I think about 2 weeks ago. It should have been fixed. And it should be out to basically every platform at this point, except maybe Switch. Yeah. So that was definitely a big issue.
You're saying that if I have two formations that use the same familiars now, if I go and load one of those formations into one of my saves or one of my parties, and then load the other formation into a different party, that second one will use different familiars. It'll just pull random familiars to fill them in.
That is how it is supposed to behave now. Yep.
That sounds awesome.
Yeah, because otherwise that would have been. Yeah, I see someone in the chat saying it's working now. Much appreciated. Yeah. So. Yeah, definitely was a problem. It was a problem for a very long time, but it is now fixed. Yeah. Okay.
Here's a funny question that I highlighted that I don't actually know. I think we need to pull an artist in here to ask this. Maybe you guys can ask during the sketching hour. But Joe Mallow asks, question: was it a design decision or just easier art to make so many champions left-handed?
I bet you that is an unforeseen it's just a side effect of the way they've been drawing the art. I bet it's just that's the obvious hand to put it in or something along those lines from the.
Yeah.
Because
it's kind of it makes sense for champions with shields that you want to have the shield in their right hand, so that you can see kind of the front of the shield instead of them just kind of holding the back of the shield to the camera, right? But I don't know if there's a justification for that for ones that just have a sword or a pistol or whatever.
Yeah, like I said, I bet it was a side effect of just the way they're looking at it, right? Because they're drawing it in one direction. Yeah.
I think that would be a great question to ask in the sketching hour, which I think is every Tuesday?
No, every Wednesday at
3
o'clock. I want to say.
I should know that.
That's right.
Somebody in chat will say when that is.
That's true. I want to comment here. I saw a chat go by that was thanking for the update, such that when you're pulling heroes from other parties, that it's much quicker now. And I just want to say that Mark did the heavy lifting on that one. That was one of his fixes. So,
thanks, Mark. Here's another question for you, Dave, from Mike Baldy. Who asks, will the standalone client announced today by Sean during the Q&A on Reddit be available to use by Steam or users currently on other platforms?
That's a good question, isn't it? So I'm not 100% sure what we've announced or not around that, but I guess I know there was a leak of that information, and more information for that will be coming out with the official announcement on the 26th. But the standalone client, as it's designed, is for the C&E Games site. That said, a little bit of finagling. There's no reason why you couldn't put your other credentials in, but I'm not going to give the details on how to do that on stream. But the intention is not that it's used by other platforms, because they're effectively already standalone clients.
Yeah, I mean, there's no reason you would need to use. I mean, it's the exact same client.
Yeah,
it's just a different login.
If the concern was that you didn't want to be logged into Steam to run the game, which there may be one or two small reasons to want that. It's technically possible, but like I said, I'm not giving out the instruction manual on stream.
Here's another question. Here's a question from Lizard Tastes Good. Lizards. Who says, can we get the ability to use the same potion multiple times via mode run automation?
That is something that that was what am I trying to say? There's definitely something that I know at the time we looked at and was like, yeah, we should include that, and then we didn't, and it's sort of been such a low priority item that it hasn't been looked at since. But to me, it feels like there's no reason why we couldn't get that in, especially as we have more resources coming on board. it's probably something that in the future can be looked at, because I can see that as being an additional helpful thing that players would like to use. So yeah.
I think it'd be interesting. The real question I have is how we would lay that, how we would design that so it kind of is intuitive to use, because I think we'd have to completely change kind of how that potion setting up is done right now in motor automation. We'd have to give you almost like a playlist version where you can kind of just add to the playlist rather than just selecting a potion and selecting an area to use it in. Might be a little bit of UI.
Oh, gotta mute my sounds here. People are getting beeps. Okay. Next question is from that Emily girl. Any ideas for future hero champions that we can be excited for? Oh, well, loaded question.
I have lots of ideas for future heroes and champions that you can be excited for.
Also, playing the Halloween event right now, so cool.
Well, thank you, Emily, and welcome to the game, I assume. So yeah, we've got a bunch of cool heroes and champions coming out. There's a new hero and champion every 3 weeks in events, just if there's any other new players in the stream. And what's a cool one coming out? Well, I mean, Break, who just came out in Liar's Night, is pretty cool. I really like the design of that champion, both visually and from a game perspective. We also have we've got some cool champions coming out who are from, or another champion coming out from the Baldur's Gate series soon, so keep an eye out for them. And there's also a cool champion coming out who let's just say, how to describe their coolness. Well, the first iteration of them broke the game. Let's say that they're that cool. So we had to completely kind of change the design because the way we designed them was just too cool for this game to handle.
Oh dear. Okay.
That's right.
I don't know how to address that, so I'm just going to move on. Next question from 17 Safin. Is there a chance you'll visit Affiliation Synergy to have bigger benefits and try and build this type of team?
Yeah, so Affiliation Synergy is an interesting mechanic. When I was onboarding our new designer, we were kind of talking about this for a little bit. And I kind of consider affiliation synergies to be above and beyond just normal power curves. So we were talking about sort of how do we balance like synergy abilities versus non-synergy abilities, and I like to kind of think I like to kind of balance with an avoid for each champion. So I don't consider their synergy abilities, their affiliation synergies or other synergies when I'm balancing, and I will just kind of balance them based on their own merits. And then affiliation synergies just add power on top of that. So I think it's always going to be better to try and build a team that has a couple of synergy matches in it. But we try to balance the champions so they're still good even if you don't do those synergies. So yeah, I mean, I think we like affiliation synergies. We like other synergies. I think it's always fun to try and build formations that work with them. And we're always trying to make sure that those synergies are powerful enough that it at least makes sense to fiddle around with that, but not too powerful that you just have to use like all the champions of the hall or all of the Ox Venture champions or whatnot. So yeah, there's kind of a fine line there. Next question here from Joe Mallow, and I actually saw a chat talking about this a bunch when it came out, but it's a good question for a dev stream such as this. So Joe Mallow asks, for us non-dev types, what is a memory leak?
Yeah, so that's a bit of a tricky question to describe in a way that for a non-dev type I'll try and make sense. I'm just going to do my best to try and make sense, make this make sense. So I guess there are kind of two primary types of memory leaks that you run into. And one of the first type is just where you allocate, like you make a new object. So you allocate more memory for something, and then you're storing it somewhere like in a list, and the next time you need one, you just allocate another one, and you don't reuse the one that you had. And every time this happens, every time you ask for a new, like for example, in the game, Actually, an example that we fixed recently was an explosive effect. It was, I don't remember whose effect it was.
It was a fireball.
It was a
effect.
fireball effect, but it was coming. It was a smoke bomb blew up. It was a smoke bomb that was blowing up.
Shandy.
And the smoke bomb had a fireball effect, and I don't think it was Shandy. Anyway, every time the effect was triggered, it was creating a new list that held, or a new pool for these fireball effects, and adding a new fireball to it, and then that effect was then finishing, and then the next time it happened, it was doing that again. And so every time this effect went off, it actually made a new fireball effect, and because it was saving it, because it was hanging on to it, they kept stacking up, and they were all still there, but they basically were no longer available. You couldn't access them. Nothing in the game was keeping track of it, but they'd been allocated, and they just hadn't been released back to the memory. So you allocate memory, then you release memory, and if you only allocate but you don't release for one reason or another, then that memory is still in use, and that of course causes the overall memory that your program is using to go up, and eventually you hit some limit depending on the size or type of the application, and at that point it crashes, and it's all bad times. In addition to that, of course, your other applications that you're running also want memory, and if your one program like our game is using up all your memory, then those programs are going to be unhappy. Although usually it's Chrome that uses up all my memory. So that's one type of memory leak, is where you're allocating things and you're actually you're hanging on to them and you haven't properly gotten rid of them. And there's the second type, which is similar. I'm thinking less applicable to us, but if you're doing more programming in a more low-level language like C or C++, where you're required to do all the bookkeeping on the memory, and when you ask for memory, it gives you an address that memory exists at, and then you keep track of that. And if you lose track of that address, if for some reason you overwrite it with something, or which can happen, then that address is just gone. You've lost your pointer to it. That memory is still there; it's still allocated, but your program no longer has the ability to access that. But it's still allocated to your program, and so anytime that happens, that memory becomes unavailable to the system. It's still allocated to your program, but your program can't access it because you've lost the address to it. And so that's another very similar type of leak. In our case, usually we do have some way to reference it, but yeah. I think it's a tricky one to describe. If I had time to put together a sort of how would I describe this to a non-developer, I could come up with a much cleaner description, I think. But hopefully,
we need the explain it like I'm 5 version, where it's like a memory leak is like when you've got your toys and you like hide one of your toys behind the couch and you lose track of it, and then you just have less toys, and eventually you just run out of toys and you're like, where'd all my toys go? And it's because all of your toys have memory leaked off into oblivion, and now you have no toys to use. You're out of memory.
Yeah, I don't know if that's helping, but we can go with that.
You know what? We'll workshop this over the next week.
We'll come up with a good answer.
And we'll have a presentation for you. We'll have 60 slides for you on this next week.
Oh no, I'm not committing.
Asterisks.
I'm not committing
Asterisks.
to that.
We won't. I'm sorry, but yeah.
Okay. Next question here is doesn't have a name. Okay.
Oh.
Well, it says design question suggestion. What do you think about adding a final Modron output that scales indefinitely, perhaps even globally? That would greatly extend the amount of investments in and profit out of the Modron cores.
Yeah. So thank you, Blank. Great question. You need to restart your house to get your toys back. Yes, exactly. So yeah, this question is about Modron outputs that scale infinitely or scale higher at least. And yes, there are plans to do that. We actually have that system all designed. We actually had that system mostly implemented. And then we had to pivot and work on some other things. So yeah, there are plans to add a system that basically for some outputs that they can go even higher if you put even more power into them, and it can get quite ridiculous if you put a lot of power into them. So yes, that is something that is planned. I'm not sure when we're going to sneak that out, but it's something we would like to do.
I'm seeing a suggestion here in the chat that instead of our one-man reenactment, it should be a thread of a 60-slide presentation.
All right. Well, we'll prepare that just in case we get no questions next week. You never know. It could happen. The community could band together to be like, don't ask any questions. We really want to see Justin in a red panda onesie doing a reenactment of Star Wars: A New Hope. So
they're going to want that now.
I'm just saying, get on that, community.
Okay.
Let's see. Here's a question.
Oh, is this the number 18 here is actually it was a comment from before about the displayed DPS.
Yes.
Doorbell Stream saying it was definitely an issue that they were out of sync even after waiting at the end of the day. So, well, I mean, we'll definitely keep an eye on that. I mean, I'll let Peter know that was that you were seeing that even after a delay.
We will highlight that.
We're not quite sure what's going on there. And it could definitely be a case of both. It could be a case that, sometimes they're out of sync because they're out of sync for that period, and there could also be an issue. It could definitely be both. Okay. Yeah. We have another question here. This looks like a fun one from Mike Baldy, and he's asking.
This is a fun one.
Trials was launched 5 weeks ago. A few users who remember their high school algebra courses predicted there would be issues with the vial drop rate and the campaign costs, along with the legendary reforge costs and decay ratios. Mm-hmm. We were told that you were going to be watching this. From the user perspective, it turns out that those predictions were, in fact, spot on. But it's been 5 weeks and these issues remain. Are you still watching? If so, can you elaborate what it is that you are watching?
Yeah, so yes, we are still watching these. We're still looking at the feedback that comes from the community. We're still poring over what you guys are saying about it and comparing that to our design intentions with it. There are likely going to be some changes coming to the vial drop rates. There are likely going to be some other balance changes coming to Trials Mount Tiamat. The thing is that it used to be back in the day that we could be very agile with these things, and we could be like, okay, we're going to make this big change, and we're going to roll it out on the 3 platforms we're on, and it only takes an hour or 2 to get those updates out to all the clients. And the big thing that has changed is now we are out on 9 or 10 different platforms, and it just takes time to get the builds out to all those platforms. So what we end up doing is we have to go as quickly as our slowest platform, and our slowest platform is unfortunately quite a bit slower than all the other platforms. So what happens there is if we want to get client updates out that change some of these things, it takes a little bit of time. So it's stuff we want to do. And there are changes that we do want to make, but sometimes we are just held back by the fact that we have to wait for a new client push if we want that change to be out on all platforms simultaneously.
So so you're promising changes. Is that what I'm hearing?
I'm saying there will be changes, but they won't. They're not going out as fast as we would like them to be. Some people are saying, yes, the vial drop rates are server side. That's true. We changed the legendary. We didn't change the legendary decay rate, did we?
I'm seeing that they really want them to be 10 plus years. No sarcasm.
Yes, well.
Yeah, I mean, one comment that I would have on that in terms of like the question here about watching. Mm-hmm. Often we look at these things just to gauge player sentiment. Is also sort of what we're looking at, not just sort of how the numbers work out. So we can look at the numbers and say, okay, this is going to take this long, but often the other side of that coin is how players feel about it, and how they're letting us know how they feel about it. So that's something that we can watch and do watch on that, even if we look at the math and say, okay, this is how long it's going to take. So they are actually a little bit separate there in that there's 2 sides to it. So.
Oh, I see. And for the decay rate, they're saying, okay, so it was 90% instead of 10%. So there was a bug with the decay rate, and yes, that was something we can change. And yes, we could change the number of vials you get from chests. Sort of the stuff I'm talking about isn't the server side stuff that we can change very quickly, but some of the client side stuff. So for example, if we wanted to change it so that you could start campaigns and share the costs across all the people who join it. That's something that would require some front-end stuff to make it clear how the costs are going to be split, and let players know that when they join that they're going to use up some vials if they join a certain campaign. And so there's a bunch of stuff there that has to happen in the client, and also requires a lot more design thought and intention than just tweaking some numbers. So oftentimes, yeah, we could go and tweak some numbers and just temporarily make things better. But oftentimes we want to do things that are in the best interest of the game longer term, which is often not just sort of snap changes to balance and drop rates and stuff like that. So, like Dave says, it's something that we're watching. It's something that we're gauging, and something that we are planning to make changes on in the future. Just no guarantees on when in the future. Here's a question from Hopix1837, who asks, are there plans to support gold over E308?
I'm not. What do you think on that?
I'm surprised that we don't already do that.
Yeah, that's like that caught me off guard. Don't we? Isn't that the E308 is the double marker? So we should be able to do past that.
Yeah, I thought that would have gotten caught up when we did the DPS over E308. If there are specific issues with gold over E308, I saw someone mentioning
server doesn't convert gold
favorable.
That
could be something we can look at.
It just ignores any gold above that.
Yeah. I'll highlight that one in yellow and pass that on to the dev team. One thing I would say is that E308 gold, I think, is quite high. I don't think it's really the general case right now that most people have E308 gold or higher. So it's definitely something we can look into, but I think also look into how players got E308 gold as well.
Right.
Definitely.
Okay. Next question here is from Doranus, and Doranus is asking, can we get the ability to right-click or otherwise remove potions before they're set to expire? I can think of several occasions where having certain potions is actually bad for a run.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good idea, honestly. I have also run into that. I had an ICP restriction one time that did damage to my party based on a percentage of health, and I used some health potions, and that actually made it quite a bit harder. And so I had to just start over and not have any tanks in my party. So yeah, I think that's a cool idea. I think we should probably add that to our list of things to put on the list of things to do.
The list of things of list of things.
Yes, it's like a preview for a trailer, or a trailer for a trailer.
It's an honest trailer. Okay. Next question here is from Garwar, and Garwar asks...
Actually, you know what? We already answered this
we?
one in the previous one, so let's... Yeah.
Nope, no.
Let's
It's a mystery
move on.
what question that was now.
Who
All right.
knows?
Next question is actually from OG17. It seems a character's legendary effects are drawn from that character's properties. Example, race, alignment, and stats. So they apply to their character and are very easy to remember, or at least easy. But many gender-based legendaries exclude their own character. Is this intended? And if so, why is this the only property that has exceptions?
Yeah, so my first thought on this is that for DPS-focused champions, anyone with the DPS role, they should always, all of their legendaries should always align to their properties. For support-based champions, they may not necessarily do that. So I know gender is certainly one where it can go any way. And the reason for that is just to have a bunch of diversity in the legendaries, so that you're not necessarily having to build out formations that are all identical. Right. If all of the support champions had legendaries that lined up with their own, you would have very homogeneous formations where it's all one. Well, you'd want to have basically all the exactly same champions in that formation. So there is certainly, the intention is that support champions don't necessarily include their own character, but DPS champions always do. I can take a look and see if that's not being applied outside of gender, because I would think that we probably want to apply that outside of gender as well. So we'll take a look at that.
Okay. Let's see. Here we got another one from Stray DX. And they ask, it says, you recently added alignment to the champion hover information. Yeah, I think we did that based on feedback from the stream. This is great. Thank you. Could we also add alignment in a way where we can tell at a glance a character's affiliation without... Okay, who's moving that around? Justin.
Sorry. I'm fixing the grammar in it as we go.
Where was I? We can tell at a glance a character's affiliation without having to open the character information. One idea I thought of was having an affiliation logo on the character box instead of the useless spyglass. Cheers.
Wow, poor spyglass.
I mean, they're right. It's not doing an awful lot.
It's got low self-esteem, that spyglass.
And now they're apologizing for their grammar in the chat. Just look what you did.
It wasn't actually the grammar. There was just a couple extra spaces. It's fine. Anyway. I think we've talked about this before. I think we talked about this in previous streams about how it's challenging to do something like this because there'll always be some more information that players want to have on there. So we add, if we add their alignment or their affiliation or whatever to the thing, it just starts to get really busy. I don't know if you remember specifically what we were talking about before.
Yeah, I know that I think affiliation and alignment were asked for to have, and perhaps I believe someone suggested some sort of matrix to show the alignment, like a symbol that could you could look at and know from the symbol sort of what the alignment was. But I think it was something that was a little bit tricky, and it would require a little bit of knowledge to know how to decode it. And so it starts to become, that by itself starts to become, I guess you'd have to actually learn how to use it in a way that might not be natural. We like to try and do things where it's more obvious on its face what it is, rather than something that requires specific knowledge of it. But I could still see it in many ways that being useful. I mean, you could have a hover on it, and then people would start to get used to looking at it and seeing that this particular arrangement of the symbols meant that. I think, and maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think there are, like, D&D has symbols for the alignments that we could just use. So we'd have to come up with ones on our own. And then same with the characters, the affiliation portion is having an icon that represents that's both obvious enough and small enough to fit on that spot starts to become a challenge, especially because of all the different affiliations that we have. So I mean, it would require a lot of careful thought, I think, to make that work.
Yeah, I think I mean, it's kind of a larger kind of discussion point there is just about how challenging it is to get information out to players. Because there's just a lot of information in the game, and getting it all onto the screen in a way that is intuitive and easy to understand at a glance, and stuff like that is actually a big challenge, and one that we're still working on in a lot of cases. So I think it's good to keep on asking for stuff like this, and we will keep on trying to find ways to put it on that maintains kind of the I won't say simplicity of the dialogues, but the ease of understanding of the dialogues that we're trying to maintain.
Okay, so just looking at the clock here, I think we are out of time.
We are out of time.
Sorry, Saver Now One, your question's going to have to wait till next week. But,
well, like we say, if we didn't get to your question this week, don't worry. You will have another opportunity. We will be live again at this same time next week, I think. And if we're not, sorry.
We thought we would be live last week.
We did. Before we sign off, though, we'd like to thank our tireless mods who copy your questions into our questions doc and generally make things awesome. Today it was Mars and Martin, so thanks to the M&Ms.
And of course, thanks to all of you for hanging out, watching the stream, and enjoying the game. Without you, no one here would get to do what we do.
Oh yeah, we'd have to do something else.
Yeah. All right. Enjoy the rest of your day, everyone.
Fade to outro screen.
Oh, just in time, too. The shredder truck came on outside.
Oh, no. Anyway, so Alien 3.
60-page slides.